Since the dawn of scientific thought, controversy has been its constant companion, with research focusing on the past of humanity being no exception to its contentious nature. And while the digital age we all inhabit provides no shortage of divisive and oftentimes misleading opinions, certain controversial takes have also found themselves in professional academic circles, sometimes standing strong for decades. Due to inconclusive or mistaken evidence, prehistoric studies occasionally yield radically differing ideas about how early humans lived and interacted with the world around them. But which of them appear to be the most likely, which of them have been deliberately sensationalized, and which assertions need further investigation? Today we will be going through some of the most controversial opinions surrounding our fellow hominins. Number 1. Eurasian Neanderthals were cannibalistic sexual predators. Australian theatre and film director, independent researcher Danny Vendramini has made headlines for his Neanderthal predation theory proposed back in 2009. In his book, Them and Us: How Neanderthal Predation Created Modern Humans, he argued that the Eurasian Neanderthals were ferocious sexual and cannibalistic apex predators who used their superior strength and agility to capture early European modern humans, also known as Cro-Magnons, for food and forced mating. Coming from Ice Age Europe, they became an unstoppable force, expanding into other continents, hunting down their weaker counterparts of the Mediterranean Levant, almost to the point of extinction, with just 50 survivors left standing. Vendramini further evidenced his case for prey-predator relationship between both hominin species, suggesting that, quote, flocking, schooling, and herding are common tactics adopted by prey species against predators. If Eurasian Neanderthals were the formidable adversary suggested, and like other mammalian predators preferentially selected solitary individuals as prey, social phenotypes may be expected to have become fixed in the Levantine human population. Concomitantly, infringements against the group would solicit negative consequences, thus leading to the fixation of an innate tribal defense ethos. The hypothesis claims that early modern humans turned the tide against their predators primarily through the use of innovative projectile weapons and superior military tactics, ultimately exterminating not only them but also other hominins standing in their way. Unsurprisingly, this raised many eyebrows. For starters, the body dimensions of Homo neanderthalensis hardly fit the description of an intimidating beast, with males standing around 164 centimeters or 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing 65 kilograms or 143 pounds. There is no evidence of Neanderthals having a gorilla-like flat facial structure. In fact, their skull possesses projecting nasal bones, as in the case of modern humans, if not even more so. There is also nothing to suggest that they ever had fur protecting them from cold. Around the time of Vendramini's book release, scientists have explored the possibility of Neanderthals using birch bark to assemble vegetal and animal materials for insulated clothing, but this is debatable. Recent direct evidence of Neanderthal fiber technology suggests that they were quite advanced and likely capable of producing clothing, rope, bags, nets, mats, and even boats. The claims of widespread interbreeding, be it consensual or non-consensual, as well as regular cannibalism appear to be ill-founded. While it is well established that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens have interbred to some capacity, the admixture is only estimated at 1 to 4%, most likely being somewhere around 2.5%. And although there is little doubt the Neanderthals engaging in cannibalism, it was limited to their own companions and never became widespread. Thus, it probably will come as no surprise that the academia wasn't exactly pleased with Vendramini's depiction of the Neanderthals, with accusations ranging from biased interpretation of sources to outright racism. The outreach was quite far-reaching, as criticism came not only from scientists with a background in social sciences, but also in humanities. American philosopher Lewis Gordon deemed Danny Vendramini a pseudo-evolutionary paleoanthropologist and bashed his thoughts, juxtaposing them to those found in David Griffith's film The Birth of a Nation. Vendramini portrays dark, lustful Neanderthals overpowering light-skinned female Homo sapiens. Although Vendramini is explicitly anti-racist in his writings, ironically the underlying racial logic of anti-blackness remains. According to the Australian anthropologist and archaeologist Professor Paul Tesson, Vendramini's theory is founded on a premise that we have been overly sympathetic to Neanderthals in the past, anthropomorphizing them into close cousins. Unfortunately, Vendramini does not make that objective comparison, instead contrasting Neanderthals with ancient modern humans in every possible negative way. Everything good is human, everything bad is Neanderthal. Our ancestors were gentle, peace-loving beings, while Neanderthals were out-of-control warmongers intent on pillage and eat humans for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Not all were quick to dismiss his ideas about Neanderthal predation, however. In a 2011 review, Australian biological scientist and historian Ian Keys reiterated the problem of circumstantial evidence for certain claims, such as Neanderthal cannibalism in the Middle East, but remained open-minded to his insights, liking them to those of previously misunderstood scientists. He said, quote, "In reading this book, I could not help but think of Alfred Wegener's hypothesis of continental drift, put forward in 1915. Wegener's hypothesis was scorned by many at this time, and it was not until the 1960s, with the understanding of plate tectonics, that an underlying mechanism to support his hypothesis was provided. Vendramini provides a similarly bold hypothesis about human origins." Number 2. Homo floresiensis survived extinction. Homo floresiensis, also sometimes referred to as Hobbit, named after the fictional race of people from a fantasy novel by the same name, were an insular species of archaic humans. Standing to approximately 100 centimeters or 3 feet 6 inches tall, these diminutive early hominins are believed to have lived in the remote island of Flores, Indonesia. It's unclear why they disappeared about 50,000 years ago, but it is likely a result of a drastic environmental change, as there is no evidence of their coexistence with other humans. Nonetheless, not all scholars are convinced they're no longer around anymore. As early as 1998, now retired social anthropologist Professor Gregory Forth has been suspecting that there are real ape-like creatures living in Flores unknown to science. This position was based on various sighting reports collected from local eyewitnesses about ape-like people, as well as his own works on mythical beings found in indigenous cultures. In 2004, Forth's impression was further strengthened with the discovery of fossil remains belonging to a previously unknown hominin, subsequently designated Homo floresiensis. They were found on the Flores Island and are believed to have survived into recent post-glacial times. After studying folklore of the indigenous Nage people for over 20 years, Forth noticed that their mythical creature Ibu Gogo is strikingly similar to floresiensis and has analogical counterparts in several neighboring cultures. Examples would include legendary beings such as Orang Pendek, meaning short man, who are said to be a race of tiny people living in the deep remote forests of the Sumatra island. Interestingly, during colonial times the latter were frequently reported by both Europeans and locals too. It did not take long before Professor reached a daring conclusion that the newly discovered Homo floresiensis is actually the very same creature described by the locals and could still be out there. In 2022, he released his first monograph, Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid, aimed at a general audience and delving into the possibility of undiscovered hominids. He said, quote, "I will confess that intuitively, the current survival of a descendant of Homo floresiensis also seems improbable to me, even though it provides the most parsimonious explanation for what Flores Islanders say about ape men and their resemblance to the fossil hominin. Yet here we are, and so too are fossil remains of floresiensis. Could we then be in for another surprise?" As one would expect, not all were keen on believing such surprises, suggesting that this theory hardly stands up to scrutiny since it's primarily based on indigenous accounts and does not provide any physical evidence. In 2004, British paleontologist and managing editor of scientific journal Nature Henry G. scoffed at Forth's suggestions. The discovery that Homo floresiensis survived until so very recently in geological terms makes it more likely that stories of other mythical human-like creatures such as yetis are founded on grains of truth. Now, cryptozoology, the study of such fabulous creatures, can come in from the cold. Australian anthropologist Yasmin Mushabash at the University of Sydney found Forth's reasoning problematic due to its over-reliance on empirical probability. In a 2013 review for Oceania, she argued that, quote, "The potential of Homo floresiensis channels his analysis in such a way that all the meticulously presented data are scrutinized in terms of empirical probability. This distinction and Forth's insistence on the significance of the empirically probable underscore my anthropological disquiet." He concludes that if they are, as he says he shows, not purely imaginary or fantastic, then this leaves just one empirical possibility, an undiscovered species. Hardly a surprising conclusion in light of the book's content, argument, and structure, and one that leaves this anthropologist at least unsatisfied. Others like Professor Jeffrey Meldrum at Idaho State University defended Forth's arguments as well as his contributions in understanding the relationship between paleontological and ethnographic sources. He proposed that throughout Southeast Asia and elsewhere, wild men, known by a variety of names, cannot readily be explained solely as imaginary constructs. He argues for the evidence for these creatures as empirical entities. He emphasizes that the presumed extinction date for floresiensis is inferred based upon a single site. Given the rarity of fossilization and subsequent discovery, the last known fossil almost certainly does not represent the last surviving representative of that species. Therefore, even a revised age of 50,000 years ago for the floresiensis site readily leaves open the possibility of recent survival of the hominoid. Number 3. Homo naledi head burials and rock art. In 2015, Professor Lee Berger from Witwatersrand University stunned the world by announcing about the remains of 15 individuals. Discovered 2 years prior by speleologists Rick Hunter and Steve Tucker, these fossils belong to an entirely unknown species of hominin dubbed Homo naledi. These short-statured humans, found in South Africa's Rising Star cave system, exhibit a unique blend of Australopithecus and Homo traits. Standing around 145 centimeters or 4 feet 9 inches tall and weighing up to 56 kilograms or 123 pounds, they possess curved fingers well suited for climbing, small brains, but also elongated lower limbs. Berger's claims about their level of sophistication, however, were no less extraordinary. He suggested that our ancient cousins intentionally buried the dead and even made rock art. Such claims were presented in 3 new studies published in 2023 and 2024. In 2 earlier papers from 2023, Berger's team investigated human-made cave engravings in the form of deeply impressed cross-hatchings and geometric shapes. They determined these non-natural markings to be intentional, with Homo naledi being the only known possible hominins that could have made them. In the words of researchers, quote, "The lines appear to have been made by repeatedly and carefully passing a pointed or sharp lithic fragment or tool into the grooves. In addition, there are scratches that fall outside of identifiable designs, which may either be mistakes, unfinished designs, or form part of the design not interpretable by us. It is unlikely that any other hominin population made these engravings. No physical or cultural evidence of any other hominin population occurs within this part of the cave system." In a report from 2024, the professor and his colleagues analyzed the skeletal material and sediment properties found in hill antechamber, the naledi chamber, and puzzle box areas. A conclusion was reached that the rapid burial by sediment was not a result of gravity-driven slumping or spontaneous material movement, but rather a deliberate cultural mortuary practice. This caused great controversy among archaeologists, since the earliest secure evidence for burial date back only 78,000 years ago, and none of the newly excavated burials provide any compelling evidence that they were actually dug. The position regarding rock art faced equal amounts of criticism, as there have been no attempts to date or study layer materials which could help verifying whether these markings were made by the said species. The situation became even more heated with Netflix's release of a documentary titled Unknown Cave of Bones, further exploring the alleged spiritual and artistic practices of Homo naledi. During the interview, Berger argued that the body of one specimen was holding a stone tool, which evinces their understanding of the afterlife, as there is no other reasonable explanation for leaving something so valuable. Though intriguing, the documentary faced backlash for its failure to present a balanced perspective on such a divisive topic, as no paleoanthropologists aside from Berger's team were interviewed and no critical scientific papers were mentioned. Australian professor Andy Harries from La Trobe University pointed out that the findings presented as evidence are rather ambiguous. There is no evidence that Homo naledi lit fires in the cave. Purported burying locations could just be from manganese staining, and charcoal within the cave remains to be dated. Charcoal from natural fires is not uncommon in caves. With regard to rock art, researchers Michael Petrolia, Emmanuel Ndiema, Maria Martínez Torres, and Nicole Boivin called attention to the fact that it is undated. In a group report, they stated, "In the absence of dating, it's simply spurious to claim the engravings were made by Homo naledi rather than by another species and potentially at a much later date." In addition, Professor Petrolia of Griffith University expressed his worry about the reputational damage such a film may cause to the scientific field, saying, "I'm concerned about public perception. Without critics out there, people will just believe." Number 4. Homo erectus did not possess controlled use of fire. For decades, Homo erectus, or rather a subspecies of them known as Sinanthropus, has been credited for being the first hominins to practice habitual use of fire, marking a pivotal milestone in the cultural evolution of humankind. As their Latin name, meaning upright man, suggests, these extinct hominin were bipedal and possessed a robust build, characterized by a broad elongated skull, sloping forehead, prominent brow ridges, and a flat nose. Though body dimensions varied among populations, certain individuals on the extreme end might have been 185 centimeters or slightly over 6 feet in height and around 68 kilograms or 150 pounds in weight. Ever since a study was published in the early 1930s which purported to find evidence of controlled fire use in Zhoukoudian Locality 1, situated about 50 kilometers southwest of Beijing, China, it has been widely accepted as the earliest record for more than half a century. In 1931, Canadian paleoanthropologist Davidson Black proclaimed that based on chemical analyses in the area, the use of fire by Sinanthropus was beyond reasonable doubt. Dating about 0.7 million years ago, this site, beyond its fire-related layers, testifies to other Homo erectus activities evidenced by 100,000 artifacts and preserved burnt bones. However, by the mid-1980s, the said findings were seriously called into question when leading researchers Louis Binford and Xuankun Ho published a paper in 1985 expressing doubts about the authenticity of evidence for in-place fire use. We found that the interpreters of the site regularly failed to note anything unnatural about the things thought to refer to the behavior of the hominids. The so-called ash layers are not halves and may not at all be ash layers. This is not to say we question that fire is evidence in Zhoukoudian. There do, however, seem to be very sound reasons for doubting that the deposits designated ash layers are all the result of in situ fires. The relationship between the deposits and the use of fire by hominids within the site is far from clear. Sure enough, this paved the way for further doubt among researchers, primarily revolving around this key question: how does one reliably differentiate between a wildfire and a man-made one, given so many conflicting interpretations? In 1998, structural biologist Stephen Weiner, together with his collaborators, reviewed all available evidence and, given the absence of ash remains as well as the dubious characteristics of the alleged fireplace, rejected the notion of in situ fire use at Zhoukoudian. In the lab, they confirmed that layers 10 and 4 in particular, commonly cited for their sizable halves, contain accumulations of organic material with no signs of soil-derived minerals associated with wood fire. For future researchers, it was the noted absence of siliceous aggregates, whose presence helps identifying man-made fires, that became the primary reason for doubting controlled fire use by said species. At the turn of the century, skepticism among anthropologists surrounding in-place fire use by Homo erectus not only remained relevant, but it kept on growing. In the year 2000, Noel Boas and his colleagues claimed that Jokudian Locality 1 was not inhabited by Homo erectus nor other hominins. Instead, they argued that hyenas were responsible for transporting their remains into the cave. The following year, Paul Goldberg, in collaboration with fellow associates, found the alleged ashes of Layer 4 to actually be subaerial water-laid sill deposits that have accumulated over time. Other strong contenders for the earliest controlled burning emerged, such as Kubifora or Chisowanja sites in Kenya, dating back 1.5 million years ago. That being said, the exact nature of these sites is also dubious, with scientists not ruling out the possibility of them being the result of wildfires. The question of intentional fire use by Homo erectus ultimately led to the launch of field investigations and lab analyses ongoing since 2009. They led to new evidence of hominin use and maintenance of fire, many of which were gathered by Chinese researchers. In the 2013 paper, anthropologist Xing Ta and his colleagues challenged Weiner's conclusions and claimed that the samples from layers 4 and 6 did in fact possess siliceous aggregates and potassium. And though layer 10 in that respect was different, they posited that it might not have necessarily been produced by Homo erectus. The samples analyzed by Weiner at Alia from layer 10 might have been the burnt products of one or more arboreal species that contain lower amounts of siliceous aggregates and elemental K. Therefore, the location and quantities of the samples analyzed by Weiner at Alia might have been insufficient to draw overall conclusions about the site as a whole. In a 2014 study on magnetic susceptibility and redness of alleged half sediments conducted by Yan Jia and his group has shown that they were originally heated to about 700 degrees Celsius or 1292 degrees Fahrenheit, which cannot happen under natural circumstances. Furthermore, in 2022, a paper was published by Ta and others pointing out that excavated bones found in layer 4 were indeed affected by heating, as evidenced by colorations, textures, mineral phases, and crystallinity index values. The research doesn't end here, however, as other possibilities are yet to be properly assessed. Nonetheless, as stated in the 2017 interview of this hotly debated topic, Professor Ta and his team see the aforementioned findings as promising in reaching closure on this problem. Based on original field notes, excavation reports, and research papers, it can be concluded that the excavated materials and traces relating to fire use activities in certain horizons at this KD site are abundant, comprehensive, and mutually supportive. Some also agreed that further research would be necessary to solve the issue and put an end to the controversy. Number 5. Denisovans and Neanderthals were capable of speech. If there is one thing that makes modern humans feel unique in this world, is their ability to maintain social relationships through speech. The conventional view has usually been that modern language is a phenomenon coinciding with the emergence of modern humans somewhere from 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. Though there was always room for doubt, little could be proven otherwise considering the complex nature of researching possible language used by other hominin. As it was once stated in the case of Neanderthals by American theoretical linguists Robert Bury and Noam Chomsky, there is no reason at present to move to the more radical conclusion that Neanderthals possessed anything like the basic property or even the rudiments of symbolic language. However, due to advancements in genetics, some researchers are starting to suspect that three human lineages, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, which diverged from a common ancestor 500,000 years ago, were not only closely related but might have been equally gifted for speech. Such claim was made by social scientists Dan Dediu and Stephen Levinson in a 2013 paper examining possible genetic evidence for communication. They observed that all three human branches share the same human-specific 2 amino acid substitutions in FOXP2, an important gene linked to language and speech. Given the similarity of genomes in all three human species, Dediu and Levinson purported this as basis for their compatibility with language. Further evidence for speech might come from examining Neanderthal and Denisovan neuroanatomy. For example, as noted by archaeologist Fran Dory, Neanderthal skull bases are less arched than those of modern humans, but more arched than those of modern apes, indicating capacity for speech, albeit with a more limiting sound range than ours. According to anthropologist Thomas Wynne and psychologist Frederick Coolidge, Neanderthal brains also seem to have enlarged Broca's and Wernicke's areas linked to communication. Given the widespread acceptance of a relationship between language, lateralization of brain function, and handedness by neurologists, anthropologist David Fryer and his team posited that Neanderthal documented right-handedness could also indicate speech production. And though little can be drawn from the poorly understood anatomy of Denisovans, French paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Kubla and neuroscientist Jean-Pierre Chaujoux note them likely evolving larger brains too, indicative of more complex behaviors. Over the years, there have been many repeated attempts to reconstruct the anatomy of the vocal tract based on fossil remains as well. In 2012, British professor Anna Barney and her colleagues did anatomical reconstructions and computer modeling of 8 adult Neanderthals by using preserved hyoid bone from Kibera locality to model the vocal space. With acoustic modeling, they managed to produce sounds A, I, and U of a Neanderthal vocal tract and found them to be indistinguishable from modern speech, challenging earlier assertions. Despite this, critics are much more cautious about such findings. To start with, researchers Robert Berwick, Mark Hauser, and Ian Tettersall found the evidence for speech based on gene-level comparisons to be quite selective. They noted that neither Neanderthals or Denisovans possess other language-related genes such as CANEP2, ASPM, or MCPH1, making molecular evidence for speech equivocal. Further doubts were caused by research articles from Israeli molecular geneticist David Kochman and his colleagues in 2017 and 2020. They examine a process called DNA methylation, which alters gene expression without changing the underlying DNA sequence itself as a result of an atom group called methyl that suppresses certain gene transcription. The analysis of genes associated with vocal anatomy has shown that DNA methylation patterns in Neanderthals and Denisovans were different compared to recent modern humans. By contrast, modern human genes affecting the larynx and face seem to have been extensively hypermethylated, meaning their expression was significantly suppressed. This downregulation might have contributed to the unique facial and vocal tract anatomy in modern humans, making the notion of ancient hominins possessing similar speech capabilities unlikely. Conclusions drawn from neuroanatomy were also met with doubt. British anthropologist Clive Gamble found it to be unreliable, noting that, quote, "The recognition of development in Broca's area and Wernicke's areas suggests that language had beginnings as far as early Homo. Even so, the position is much less certain than for handedness, and handedness itself need not necessarily indicate the presence of language." South African linguist Rudolf Botha shared this perspective as well, saying, "Having the anatomical infrastructure required for speaking and hearing does not entail having language, linguistic capacity, or competence." As for fossil-based evidence for speech, American evolutionary biologist William Tecumseh have found it to be untenable and urged to focus on other methods instead. In a 2009 paper, he stated, "It is a simple but unfortunate fact that the key tissues of the vocal tract do not fossilize, and any possible reconstructions are perforce based on quite indirect lines of evidence. Most of these attempts at vocal tract reconstruction failed to stand up to empirical scrutiny. Despite a voluminous literature, no confident assertions can be made about hominin speech anatomy and/or speech motor control beyond the obvious one based on comparative data. In my opinion, approaches based on DNA analysis offer far more promise for dating key events in the evolution of speech and language." This video is a first and rather lengthy attempt to provide a glimpse into the complexities of researching human evolution and cultural practices. If you enjoyed it and would love to learn more about the ancient human world and its fascinating legacy, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.